All right, it's a live episode of Locked On Pelicans. The newest trade rumors make it pretty clear what the Pelicans are doing right now. It's more significant than you realize. It's a live episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Pelicans. I'm your host, Jake Madison, and we've got plenty of updates ahead of the NBA draft when it comes to rumors around Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, and even Zion Williamson. We're going to fill you in on what the Pelicans are doing because I think their plan is finally becoming clear. And of those two timelines that the everydayers know I've talked a lot about, the Pelicans seem to finally be picking one and kind of picking a direction, but nothing is set just yet. So if you're watching this live show in the moment with me, the way this works is I'm going to just do the full show. It's going to be about 30 minutes. Then we'll do a little bit of bonus Locked On Pelicans after the fact where I will answer your questions from the chat. So that will be a little bit later in the show. So let's just dive into the latest updates on Trey Murphy and Herb Jones. I reported yesterday that the Pelicans are talking to Atlanta about a deal involving Trey Murphy in the 8th overall pick. A lot of people ran with that and left out the context that it would be more than just the 8th overall pick. The deal is centered around Trey for 8, but there would be other picks, other players involved in this sort of thing. And now you're hearing Jake Fisher of the Mark Stein newsletter, Bleacher Report, someone I very much trust, say, yeah, the Pelicans are getting significant calls on Trey Murphy and saying about 6 to 12 teams are reaching out and that it's going to take about a Desmond Bane-like package to pry one of them from New Orleans. This is really significant to me. At the trade deadline, they were getting Desmond Bane package offers for Trey Murphy, and basically they shot all of those down immediately. They had a pretty decent picks-heavy package from the Warriors on the table, and they said absolutely not. I believe it was at least 3 first-round picks plus a player or two in there. Earlier in the offseason, even a couple of weeks ago, we heard the Pelicans had no interest in trading Trey Murphy for a picks-heavy package. But all of a sudden now, the Pelicans seem to be open to a pretty picks-heavy package for Trey Murphy and or Herb Jones. That's a significant shift here. So it seems that the Pelicans' view on their current roster, their direction, really might have shifted dramatically, especially when you tie that into the fact that we've heard repeatedly, and I believe this to be true, that the Pelicans are trying to get into the top 10 of the draft. They clearly are targeting a player in mind, maybe more than one player potentially here. If you're doing that, right, that's kind of the opposite of trying to win now, to prioritize your veteran timeline around Zion Williamson here. So more and more, it looks like the Pelicans are maybe going to go through a rebuild here, or at least prioritize youth versus your established veterans, even if like I'm 40 and they're 27 or 26, 25, and it feels weird to call them older, but they are. Right? The Pelicans' thinking seems to have really shifted here, especially when we're getting reports that the Pelicans are not trading for Ja Morant, which I said in yesterday's also live show was probably less than 5%. It doesn't even make sense if they're trying to win for Ja Morant to fit with this team. I think this is pretty significant from this viewpoint. The Pelicans seem to be accepting of where they are in the Western Conference. This roster is not a playoff team. Maybe play in, but that seems like it's the ceiling. You don't want that to be the ceiling for your team. That's settling for like not even quite mediocrity, right? Around there, but I wouldn't even say that's like mediocre. It's just not good is kind of what it's settling for here. So that's kind of where the Pelicans seem to be going. Again, that's pretty significant. For a while now, they have kind of actually refused to accept that this is maybe the best path or something that they should do. But by simply listening to calls for Trey Murphy, for Zion Williamson, not that they're shopping those guys. And I want to be very clear on this because we're going to talk more about this in the third segment here. I don't think they're actively shopping either of these two players. And there's still a chance they go in a different direction than a rebuild and like push some chips in and go like, let's go for it. I do think to a degree, they're letting the market decide. More on that later in the show here. But all of a sudden now, I think they kind of accept and realize where they stand in the Western Conference. When you look at the West next year, there's two teams that might be not trying to make the playoffs, and that's Memphis and Sacramento. Of your 15 teams, 13 of them, including New Orleans, would be gunning for the playoffs. That means 5 teams are going to be left out of just the actual postseason. 3 of those teams won't even make it to the play-in tournament. That's difficult. It's a bloodbath out there, and some of those teams are pretty good. So they've been a little bit, in my opinion, in denial of where they actually stand. And I've reported this before too, that they had a 5-game winning streak last year, and they were like, we are going to make the playoffs. Internally, the belief, the delusion, you could call it, was like, we're making the postseason. Not even just the play-in tournament, but like, we're going to make the playoffs. Then they promptly lost 9 straight games. For a team that was trying at the end of the year, actively trying to push for the 10th spot, they couldn't even do that against a lot of tanking teams. They finished 11 games back of the 10th seed and the Golden State Warriors. Sorry, 11 games back of the 10th seed. This is not a playoff roster. There's talent here, yes, but for whatever reason, and that's a show for another day, it just hasn't worked. It hasn't come together at all. And so this team needs to really take stock of who they are, where they are, and not be like, we can do it, right? It's the Arrested Development meme where they're like, did it work for those people? No, but it might work for us. Like, they live that, I think, a little bit here. And that's a pretty frustrating thing to be able to be a part of, I think, as a fan. If you look at me like checking my phone, I'm trying to see if there's a big trade alert or anything that's going to be going down as I'm actually doing the show, which is partially why I wanted to do this one live. But it does feel these latest trade rumors are signaling more of a rebuild. Now, you can still try and be competitive. You're just doing it on the young guys' timeline. If Fears and Queen take you to the playoffs, that's great. It doesn't mean that you are tanking. This is a big difference from actively tanking. It's just it's which players are you prioritizing, and the players that they are prioritizing are ones that are likely not going to win them games just yet. So I wouldn't call it tanking. It's just you're finally picking which path you want to go down and which players you want to prioritize. You're picking one of the two timelines, and I do think these latest trade rumors really make it seem like they are doing just that. And I think that's a pretty significant statement here. I also think about this with Jamahl Mosley, the new head coach. And one of the reasons that Joe Dumars wanted to hire him was he said this at the press conference, that they really liked what Mosley did with a young Orlando Magic team and what he molded them into. And that line has always stuck with me, because this is not a team that, if they're trying to win now, is like young and needs to be molded. Zion Williamson is not looking to be molded. He is who he is. Same for Trey Murphy, same for Herb Jones, right? But Jeremiah Fears, Derek Queen, if they get into the top 10 and draft somebody there, those are players that can kind of be molded by your head coach and turn into what you want. This team was not, when Mosley took over the Orlando Magic and they had guys that are 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, yeah, that's a young team that you got to shape a little bit. A team with 25-year-olds and up isn't exactly that. So now you have Mosley, who's done this before with really young guys. Give him more young guys and build a core that can grow more together than what the Pelicans had. I'm not saying this is the direction they're going to go. More on that in the third segment here, but this does seem to be that they are accepting that there is a rebuild and they're finally prioritizing the youth timeline. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? Let me know in the comments down below. Coming up next, so if you're trading Trey Murphy, if you're trading trading Herb Jones away, should be Zion Williamson too, right? How come we haven't heard anything about him? That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. I got the answer for that. I don't know if you're going to like it, though. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Kalshi. The World Cup is here, and it's the most electric time in soccer. On Kalshi, you can trade every single match and the championship game. Right now, Switzerland is trading at a 40% probability to beat Canada, meaning a $100 trade pays out $239.92 if they win. And as the World Cup heats up, those numbers move in real time, and you can buy in or out at any point. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. So for a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use code LOCKEDON to get $10 when you trade 10. That's KALSHI, Kalshi. Trade on anything. 18 plus only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk. It may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans also brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. There are certain flavors that just instantly feel like summer. And for a lot of people, those classic red, white, blue freezer pops are right at the top of the list. Sweet cherry, lime, blue raspberry. It's one of those nostalgic summer flavors everybody recognizes. You already know it. You have that taste in your mouth right now. The new 5 Hour Energy is bringing that flavor combination into the new Firework Freeze 5 Hour Energy shot, blending sweet cherry, zesty lime, and electric blue raspberry in one refreshing shot, inspired by those iconic summer freeze pops here. That flavor just takes you back to just being outside all day during summer break, riding bikes, staying out late, then grabbing one of those freezer pops before fireworks or a backyard barbecue. So ignite your taste buds with the flavor of summer. Get a Firework Freeze 5 Hour Energy shot today. For more information, visit 5hourenergy.com. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 12,000, almost 13,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, and become an everydayer. It means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. You can also watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every weekday at 10:30 a.m. Same place you watch your Pelicans play. If you're looking for just a little bit more information on this draft, well, we've got the draft guide for you. This is the draft day show. If you're listening in the morning, you just want to catch up on all the players the Pelicans might be targeting here, LockedOnPodcast.com/NBA draft guide. It's free. It's from the experts at No Ceilings. It's the Locked On NBA draft guide. That's LockedOnPodcast.com/NBA draft guide. All right, let's keep talking about the trade rumors around the Pelicans. I think this kind of signals a little bit of a different direction from this team, that they're maybe more open to a rebuild and could go in a rebuild direction, which, depending on how you feel, could be a good thing, could be a bad thing if you want them to try and win. A rebuild isn't always fun. I do think it's important, though, when you go through something like this, really highlight the young players and how exciting and fun they could be, and that makes it a little bit easier when you feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel and you're going to come out on the other side of this. But if the Pelicans are doing that, why are we not hearing any talk, like at all, around Zion Williamson? If they weren't listening to trade talk, trade calls, that's the word I'm thinking of, for Trey Murphy, Herb Jones at the trade deadline, and you're doing it now, shouldn't you listen to trade talk, trade calls, around Zion Williamson? So why nothing on Zion? And I think this is a pretty simple answer. He doesn't have much interest around the league right now, and his value is low. When teams are trying to kind of make their first move, and look, the whole league is held up. All of these trades are held up by Giannis and what Milwaukee is going to do, whether they keep him, which they shouldn't, whether it's Boston, whether it's Miami. Feels like it's going to be Boston at this point. If we have time in the show, I'll give you a reason why. So Zion is going to be plan B, plan C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. I don't think Zion has much value around the league. You're waiting on Giannis. You can't get him. Maybe you pivot to Kawhi Leonard. Maybe you pivot to Trey Murphy. Maybe you then go after Herb Jones. Maybe Jaylen Brown, who could be on the move multiple times. As dominoes fall, there may be more interest for Zion Williamson, but I don't think teams are at all interested in calling the Pelicans being like, let's see if we can get Zion from them. Let me ask you this, because we talked about it in yesterday's show, and I don't think we need to do much more talking about Ja Morant here on Locked On Pelicans. Would you offer much at all, really, for Ja Morant? I wouldn't. Most teams around the league wouldn't. That's why he hasn't been moved yet, because Memphis wants to see if they can get some more from him here. But you're not giving much up for Ja Morant. I think that applies to Zion Williamson as well. We don't need to go into the issues that he has had in his career. And you, Pelicans fan, might be saying, wait, Jake, he's healthy now. He played in 62 games last year. He did. But one season isn't going to change people's opinions and perceptions around him. And I think that's a really important thing to look at. You know, his stats, by all accounts, were down last year as well. And he's in line to make over $42 million. I just don't see him being a trade priority for many teams around the NBA at this point in time. Maybe later, but certainly not right now. For $42 million, look, you need to be basically the number one guy on the team and act like a 1A option. And there are moments when he does that, but there are plenty of moments when he doesn't. And this year, they shifted him to a different role, tried to kind of use him off ball more, and his numbers dropped to a career low. He scored a career low 21 points per game, worse than his rookie year while playing more minutes, taking fewer shot attempts, though, than his rookie year. Rebounds were down. Assists were down. It's a different role than they're using him here, but part of the problem with that is that's probably not the best way to use Zion, right? You're kind of making him less great by putting him in that role. But he also hasn't proven he can be your number one guy and necessarily worthy of that $42 million contract just next year. And that's guaranteed fully at this point in time. Year after that, it's $44.8 million. So call it $45 million. That's a lot of money to commit to someone that you might be unsure about. That's part of the issue with Ja Morant as well. And Zion doesn't defend. His defense until the very end of the season was atrocious last year. And that comes on the heels of him actually trying on defense and looking the best we've ever seen him on defense in limited minutes 2 years ago. But him then taking a step back on that side of the ball feels like a choice. That's not a great thing. That's not going to raise your trade value at all. So that to me is part of the problem here when it comes to his value. That's the reason you're not hearing anything about him. You're hearing about Trey Murphy. You're hearing about Herb Jones because teams want those players. You also know who you're not hearing about? You're not hearing about Jordan Hawkins because teams don't want Jordan Hawkins. You're not hearing about Jordan Poole because there aren't teams that are like, let's go and get Jordan Poole. You're not even hearing about DeJounte Murray because of the injury that he recently had. So I think when you look at that, that's the reason you're not hearing anything about Zion Williamson. Teams right now don't want him. Simple as that. Yes, if you trade Trey Murphy, if you trade Herb Jones, if you trade in to the top 10 of the draft, should you trade Zion Williamson? Yeah, at that point, if you're going to go through a rebuild, trade Zion Williamson away. But you also need a team to be interested in him and to want him and to at least give you some value. The Pelicans will not just simply give him away for absolutely nothing. And so that I think is worth keeping in mind when people are saying like, why aren't we hearing anything about Zion? And I got that a lot today. Well, the reason is there isn't much interest in him. And while it also ties to, I don't think the Pelicans are actively shopping really any of their players. And that's an important thing to keep in mind when it comes to this. I want to get into that part of it. I do think the Pelicans are partially letting the market decide what direction they should go in. Let's look at that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by Indeed. Workplace chaos can show up fast, and that's where Indeed sponsored jobs come in. Indeed sponsored jobs help you reach candidates who actually fit what you're looking for based on skills, experience, and location. So finding the right person can make all the difference, whether it's building a business or building a winning team. right? Think about how the Pelicans have made a lot of new hires here and hope those are going to have really serious impacts on this roster, right? One great addition can have a ripple effect on everyone around him. And when you find someone who brings the right skills, attitude, and experience, it's going to make the entire group better. And that's why finding qualified candidates matters so much, and why tools like Indeed sponsored jobs can help make that process easier. So spend less time searching, more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of Locked On Pelicans are going to get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on Locked On Pelicans. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join us on YouTube as well. You can also watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network for your second listen. It's Locked On Saints with Ross Jackson. I hung out with him on Friday, and Theo, and a couple of other friends too. But he's got some great content, especially around everything going on with the Saints this offseason and some of the future plans. Make Locked On Saints your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, the #1 sports podcast network. Also, 10 years of Locked On. My 10-year anniversary is in September. September 1 is, I think, what they call it. But I've been here basically since the beginning, which is a real long time to cover this team. I will get to your questions. I see them in the chat in just a few minutes here, but I want to wrap up this first part of Locked On Pelicans with this thought. Just because we're hearing these trade rumors and it seems like they are leaning towards a rebuild or kind of looking at that direction does not mean they will actually go in that direction. A lot can happen over the next, at this point, we're looking at like 22 hours in the lead up to the NBA draft. That's an important thing to keep in mind. We can report on what we're hearing in the moment, but things can really change quickly, and it doesn't mean these talks or other things like that did not happen. One of the things I do think the Pelicans are doing is seeing where the market takes them, right? Seeing where the trade market leads them here. I think if you look at the directions they could go, youth timeline or the around Zion Williamson timeline. Look, if you were to add, or like a competitive timeline now, you could add someone like Jaylen Brown, who is clearly a 1A kind of guy to this team. And I think that makes you better. And if you have an opportunity to get a Jaylen Brown, maybe you go and get a Jaylen Brown. Maybe it is one of those things where all of a sudden you realize it looks like trades are like happening here in the moment. Is that a thing? We'll get to those in a minute here. But that's going to be a little bit crazy, and we'll get to react to these in real time, which will be a lot of fun. And if you're listening to the podcast or watching on Gulf Coast, you can see this. The whole thing will be on YouTube. Just search Locked On Pelicans. So let me make my point, and then we can get distracted here and we can react in real time. If you have an opportunity to get a Jaylen Brown when those guys aren't normally available, maybe as the third team in a Milwaukee, Boston, Pelicans deal, Giannis to the Bucks, you get Jaylen Brown to the Pelicans, and then whatever the Bucks need, you go and do that sort of thing, I think. And if you have that opportunity, cool. Now you know what your direction is. I don't think the Pelicans are going to be able to outbid a team like the Atlanta Hawks or other teams if they want a Jaylen Brown. We'll see if Jaylen Brown actually gets moved. That's part of this as well. But yeah, I think they're waiting to see what they can get done. If you get an opportunity to say get a Jaylen Brown and a Miles Turner, this team looks really different all of a sudden. And then maybe it depends on the rest of the roster, I'm feeling good about them being a playoff team. But if you can't get those guys and you don't have a way to meaningfully upgrade your roster right now for this coming year, and you realize, oh, we're not going to beat a lot of these teams. Okay, well, we're going to pivot because teams are offering a lot for Trey Murphy right now. So the Pelicans, to some degree, I have felt that they are very, not rudderless, but they don't know their exact direction yet. And they're going to eventually need to pick one. I think you're kind of at that inflection point here where they do need to pick a direction. And they're finally kind of realizing that and maybe more open to one than they were before. By the way, Locked On Cavs and Danny Cunningham is in the chat right now. For your second listen tomorrow, he and I are actually going to be hosting Locked On NBA Game Night, where we will be reacting immediately to the NBA draft. So if you want kind of the biggest, Danny, we got to plan the show out, but I would assume it's going to be something like talking about the first couple of picks, then the biggest like surprises of the night, and then reacting to any trades. Does it sound like a good show to you? If it does, everyone, you can go and listen to that show on Locked On NBA tomorrow night. When it'll probably post kind of late. But I do think the Pelicans, to get back to the original point before we wrap up the show and I take your questions, is that they're letting the market decide the direction that they are going to go. It's somewhat smart. I would maybe prefer that you just have a vision and you go out and execute it. And maybe they started to do that last year and realized, oh man, someone like Jordan Poole wasn't it, and we made a mistake there. So they're pivoting their vision, and there's something to be said for being like, that didn't work, let's do something else. So you kind of want to applaud them for that sort of thing, but that's somewhat what the Pelicans, I think, are doing right now. I think they realize that this team won 26 games and you can't just run it back, whether that's a rebuild or trying to significantly upgrade your roster. You got to do something, right? And that's what the Pelicans are feeling, and they're kind of exploring all different options to be able to go and do that. Honestly, that's pretty smart and exactly what they should be doing. So if that's the case, I kind of applaud them and the approach that they're taking for all of this. So that's kind of where things are. It does, if I had to make some predictions, I do feel like we're going to see a Trey Murphy trade. At this point, it's similar to the Boston. Can they bring back Jaylen Brown when he is now clearly been in these trade talks and rumors? Can you bring him back, or do you just burn him like that? Somewhat similar situation for Trey Murphy. Is not going to impact the mental side of everything for him. And I definitely think that it could. So that's worth keeping in mind as well. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. We are going to get to Locked On Pelicans After Dark here in a second. So I appreciate y'all so much for listening. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Stay through the end card here. I'll be back with y'all in about 10 seconds. All right, we're back. That was the end of the actual Locked On Pelicans show. Now I'll chat with y'all for a couple minutes. Hold on, let me catch up on the trade here. Shout out you, Danny, by the way, for joining and watching in. We all like each other at Locked On, which is always just kind of fun to me here. So I've enjoyed that, like, just being friends with everybody and supporting one another this way. Minnesota sending Julius Randle and the number 28 pick in the draft to the Brooklyn Nets in a 3-team deal that sends Nick Claxton to the Chicago Bulls. Sources tell ESPN the Timberwolves will get 33. The Timberwolves will acquire Brooklyn's 33rd pick for Randle and number 20. Why did he put those as number 33 then number 28? That's so weird to put those backwards, truthfully, for everything here. So Minnesota... Oh, okay, for Randle and 28. Okay, so they get the 33rd overall pick and Nick Claxton. So they dumped salary, right? That's what that is. He makes more money than, hold on, let me look at their salaries, right? That was a salary dump for like a not horrible player either. I like Nick Claxton, but there's no way he makes as much as Julius Randle, right? If they're giving up 20, I'm confused on what it is, but yeah, they're for Randle in 28. So Randle and the 28th pick are going to Brooklyn for Claxton in 33. Is that it? Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, that's a salary dump, and you still get a good player in return. Okay, it's not the worst trade I've seen. I couldn't tell you enough about either of those teams to be like, let's do it. But yeah, that's all right. Cool. Look, at least something is happening here. Something's happening. Let's make some moves. That feels still like Minnesota's trying to do something pretty big, or that's for Dosunmu trying to just re-sign him. Yeah, that makes sense too. I also wonder if that could mean Rudy Gobert gets on the move here. All right, let's go to your questions in the chat here. And sorry for some of the technical difficulties. I literally tested this earlier, then it didn't work. So that's always fun here. All right, here's a great question. Is it possible the new direction is due to a dose of reality from the new coach? Is in him telling the front office they were deluded about the roster, but in a nice way, of course. I think that's some of it, right? I do think this is Jamahl Mosley coming in and giving his opinion on where this team is. I also think this would have been decided ahead of time, right? If Mosley's like, you got to rebuild, you can't do this, that would have been decided. It wouldn't be like, I'll take the job and whatever the stipulations of taking the job were. It might be like, we want you to win games next year. And then he comes in and is actually like, no, this roster isn't good enough. You need to make changes. That's not how that's going to work. You will usually have your front office and your coach aligned. And there was a lot of talk about alignment and everyone being aligned with one another. I kind of hate that corporate speak. And I asked, like, what does that mean on a daily basis? And no one could really answer that question. But I would assume they would have been on the same page about this from the get-go. So no, I don't think it's like Mosley coming in and being like, y'all got to do this. Part of it is the coach is the coach, and they know that. And they just coach who's in front of them to the best of their ability sometimes, or is in on tanking, which you also see, which was Utah this last year. Their head coach, Will Hardy, knew what his job was, and it was to lose games, and definitely tried to help them do that. I can tell you that for a fact here. I'm a Hawks fan. I've been watching the last couple days for obvious reasons. Well, I appreciate you tuning in. Bridges in the 24th pick for Murphy and Bay. No, absolutely not. That's a terrible, terrible trade for New Orleans and doesn't help them really in what they need to do at all. That would be, no, you must be a Knicks fan here. Big Major 504. You don't trade your best defensive player when your new coach is defense first. I mean, yeah, you do. Like, you absolutely do if that's in the best long-term interest of your roster. And I think that's part of it. Look, I love Herb Jones. I own 2 Pelicans jerseys right now. One of them is Jeremiah Fears. I bought the black Zero Fears City Edition jersey last year. I also bought the Herb Jones, the purple City Edition jersey from 2 years ago. I love that jersey. I love Herb Jones as a player. But if his value is high, you've got to cash in on this. Look at what the Chicago Bulls have done for the past couple of years. By trying to be mid, right, like really striving for mediocrity with their roster, the value of all of their players collapsed. And they got nothing for the players on their roster. So when they started moving pieces, you're like, man, they could have gotten more 2 years ago. It reminds me of the DeMarcus Cousins trade to New Orleans, right? Vlade Divac was like, yeah, I had a better offer yesterday, so I needed to make the move today. You've got to strike when the timing is right. Otherwise, the value goes down. If Herb Jones's value is the highest you have right now, and you realize this team isn't close to competing, it is a move you should make to trade him, as painful as it is. But those are the tough decisions front offices need to make, and they need to be clear-headed enough to be able to make those kind of moves. So, yeah, you do trade your best defensive player when your new coach is defense first. If you've got a long-term vision that you need to go. You've already traded your best defensive player. His name was Dyson Daniels. Yeah, but Dyson Daniels, this is the thing with Herb Jones. I got asked the other day in just a text message with friends of like, okay, if we're trading Herb Jones to Atlanta for the 8th pick, could we get Dyson Daniels back? I don't particularly want Dyson Daniels, right? Look, elite defender. I will give you that one, but his offense is bad. His offense is offensive. 12 points per game last year. He shot from the field 52%, but he shot 18% from 3. 18%, 19%. I'll round up and give it to him. Percent from 3. That's not good. You need well-rounded players. Otherwise, he's a non-factor in the postseason a lot of the time. That's a similar thing to Herb Jones as well here. So that's part of it. Aside from Nate Ament, who do you think are the Pelicans' other guys in the draft? If they had 1 or 2 picks, which players would be their priority? I mean, I think they want a big man, right? Whether it's Mara from Michigan, Morez from Michigan, it could be also Chris Senick Jr., as well from Houston. I think they're looking at big men, right? They need a big man. And if you're going to build around Derek Queen, let's say, and move on from Zion, you need to find a complementary big to pay next to him, because we've learned that forcing 2 bad defensive bigs together in Zion and Queen, and one of them who doesn't rebound well, one of them who rebounds at a medium rate, but will get better at it in Queen, doesn't work. So I would imagine it's got to be a big man, but this team just gets fixated on certain players. So that's part of it. Would Herb Jones for 11 and Moses Moody from the Warriors make any sense? I think the Warriors would do that. I don't know if the Pelicans would do that alone. Maybe. Like, I could see that. He was out for the remainder of last year. I don't know what his health status is for Moses Moody. I wouldn't say he's particularly great, but I'd probably take a flyer on him. What is his contract? Yeah, his contract's fine. Like, you could sell me on that pretty easily, actually, assuming you're kind of blowing it up and trading everybody else here. All right, we have the Julius Randle trade. Who have you heard is interested in Herb Jones? Could he get a lottery pick and trade? Yeah, I think he'd get a lottery pick. I don't think he gets you a top 10 pick by himself, but I think he can get close, like maybe 11 from the Warriors, but I feel like they're looking for more offense there too. So I think that's part of the issue with it all. So yeah, I think there is a deal potentially to be had there. We need to rip the Band-Aid off. It's been 7 years with this core, and we're a playing team at best. I don't understand the loyalty to mediocrity. I don't think it's loyalty to mediocrity. And I think that's an important distinction here. I think this is also something where the Pelicans, it's not loyalty to mediocrity. It's they want to stay relevant, right? It's about relevancy. It's about selling tickets and making this team stick in this market. It's been a rocky road for the 20 plus years that they've been here. We've seen tremendous fan support. We've also seen moments when there isn't tremendous fan support. And I don't mean that as a knock on fans. I don't think fans owe loyalty to these organizations whatsoever. I think these organizations, these teams need to be worthy of your fandom, your devotion, the mental capacity that you put towards them, right? Riding with the wins and losses, they lose and you feel bad, right? Like that takes a toll on you. You also spend money on them, and sometimes they're not worth spending money on. That's the truth. So it's not that they are loyal to mediocrity. It's just they want to put enough of a product out there on the court to be like, look what we're doing. We're trying, show up. I think you can lose games and still get that if you have the right marketing around it, which is a couple of things. It's promote Jeremiah Fears, Derek Queen, and what these players could be in the future. Like this is what every team does. The Pelicans have done this before. But if they're going to be bad, say, for 2 years, and they know they're probably going to be bad for 2 years, it's about the potential. And lower prices a little bit too always helps. But then people feel like they're in on the ground floor of something. Like this is the blueprint. Lower prices, get people in to see these young guys. You don't win games, that's cool. Look at Jeremiah Fears growing. Look at Derek Queen growing. And then when they turn into something, you feel like you were there from the beginning, right? It's that idea, the hipster mentality of like, there's an undiscovered band and you know about them, and then they get famous and you're like, I was there first. It feels really good. That's why people do that and kind of act insufferable about it. But it's that idea with players and teams too. And that's what they should do. And I think you could do that just as well and be as successful in terms of sales, all that stuff, as just being a play-in tournament team and being, as the kids say, mid here for all of that. All right, let me keep going through the chat here. So put your things in there. Naturally 5991 says fave draft prospect in a Trey Murphy trade. I like Morez Johnson Jr. if you're getting in there. I would take him at 8 in that range for sure. I think he just looks like the prototypical big man you need in the NBA. He moves really, really well. I like him more than Mara, actually. And that's who I mentioned. Riddled Monster says, Nate Ment seems to be a smokescreen. I think the Pels really want Mara. No, I don't. I don't think there's a smokescreen to this. I think it's just pretty obvious who they usually want, just like we kind of knew about Derek Queen. We kind of knew they were going to draft Micah Peavy in the second round just because he went to Georgetown. Like, that was a joke that was running around in a lot of text message threads I was on. It was like, well, look what happened. I think sometimes this team is just a little bit obvious, right, when it comes to it all. So there you go. Choppy Duck, that's great. You've been here for a long time. The Pelicans get a lottery pick from 8 to 14. Who do you think is the best player to draft? I still think would be Morez Johnson Jr. as well. Like, that's who I really like. I think he fits this team really well and what they're looking to do. James Park says, do you think the Pels need more defense or more offense? I don't think they need either. Like, I think they just need to commit to a direction and find the right type of players. You know, if you're committing to going through a bit of a rebuild, and again, I don't want to call it tanking or losing on purpose or anything like that. Maybe these guys take leaps and you win games. But if you're prioritizing Fears and Queen, I'm still in talent accumulation mode at that point in time, which tends to be prioritizing draft picks, young guys, and those sorts of things. So it's less about offense and defense and just get more of like good, like future good players in the building at that point in time and focus on building up Queen and Fears and figuring out if those are your two core guys, what you need. And I think that's the direction that they should go with everything here. Bobby says this team needs to follow the Saints blueprint, youth movement. It's time. Yeah, like I've said, I think they need to go through, I think they need to blow it up. And I've been pretty consistent on that all year long. And that like the two timelines approach like didn't work at all last year. Really, really didn't. And it also makes it feel like it was a little bit of a wasted year here. The mind of Danny says we ain't trading 11 for her. Maybe, I don't think so. I don't know if that's even on the table right now. So if it's not on the table, you're certainly not going to do it. JP Therio says, what do you think of Dusty May getting hired by the Mavs? Changes the way the Pelicans view the lottery. I mean, a little bit, but I think as you've seen Masai Ujiri running that team, he's going to do what he wants to do. I don't think a new coach coming in is going to dramatically change their big board or anything like that at all. So I don't think that's going to really adjust anything here. Oh, okay. So the Timberwolves didn't get Nick Claxton. They just simply dumped Randall. Oh, wow. Okay. That's interesting. That's interesting to me. I didn't realize that was the trade. Wow. That's a little bit eye-opening, truthfully. Curious what's going on in Minnesota then. What was the other? We got a couple more questions here and we'll start to wrap it up. Do you think that Zion will reach a point in the near future where he doesn't want to be on the Pelicans anymore? It's a valid question. I don't know. I'll tell you this around Zion Williamson. When he says he wants to be here, when he says this is home, you should believe him. I feel very confident in saying that he 100% means all of that he feels like he has kind of grown up here, that he stays here, that like this is where he lives. I very much believe that he wants to be in New Orleans. 100% that he wants to be in New Orleans. Will that change? Maybe. Depending on how this franchise operates and where he's at in his career, like that could always change, I think. I don't want to speculate on that because I can't. I'm not him. But I feel very confident in telling you, whenever he says he wants to be here, he 100% means that. And very much loves the city, loves being here. I actually think like most of these players start to really appreciate New Orleans. Trey Murphy has talked about it. He likes being here because, look, people just kind of leave him alone. You'd have Drew Brees just like walking around town and no one would really bother him that much. And that's something that these players appreciate. That's not going to be the case in a Los Angeles or New York or other places as well. But that's a great question, but I couldn't answer that one for sure. Giannis getting traded tonight. Y'all, I hope so. This has been too much. This is annoying. Just get it done. Please get it done. That would be what I want to do here. Gut feeling, only Trey traded or 2+ Pelicans traded? I'd say 2+. I think they won 26 games. They need to make dramatic changes in one direction here. We're going to challenge the Bobcats for how bad we're going to be this season. Well, the Bobcats aren't a team in the league anymore. But if you're going to be when they won, 17 games? Or was it like 10 games, 11 games in the lockout shortened season? Hold on, we can look at this. I'm kind of curious now what their history is. Hold on. Franchise index. What was their low? 7. Woof. That's even worse than I thought. That was the lockout season. They went 7-59. No, I don't think they'll be that bad. I truthfully don't think they'll be that bad. Wow. I forgot how bad that was. That's the fewest ever, right? Yeah. My goodness, is that atrocious. So if Trey's not traded tomorrow, is he staying? No, not necessarily. Something could get done later, but I do feel that since they're not actively looking to move him, the likelihood of him staying if he's not traded on draft night goes significantly up. if a deal isn't in place. It won't be official until later. But, I think they're looking to move Trey, and one of the requirements if they move him is probably either to get a player better than him, so a Jaylen Brown, or to get like a top 10 pick to draft somebody that they want. It might be one of those things where you get a deal done when Atlanta is on the clock, when you know who's going to be available. There is some risk because we know who the top 4 picks are going to be. We don't know after that. So, you don't want to trade up to 8 and then your guy goes at 6 or 7 and now you're thrown into disarray. So this deal might not happen. I hadn't thought about that until like actually during the draft. We'll see. We'll see what ends up happening here. Claxton was so cheap, Pelicans couldn't enter into that trade. I mean, they don't have the money to add it in unless they trade a player away right now. So there isn't necessarily an option for that. They couldn't just absorb him without basically going into the luxury tax, which, depending on when this trade is finalized, would actually be like a disaster for them if that were to be the case, because then you would have to pay that this season. So no players going to Minnesota is kind of interesting here to me. So the Bulls just took him in, I'm guessing. I got to look at that trade a little bit more because I do think that's actually like a very interesting one of like the Brian Hindenhorst, what could it mean kind of thing. All right, let's wrap it up there. The chat's starting to wind down, but I appreciate y'all so much for listening. Like I said, I do think it really feels like they're maybe leaning towards a rebuild or just the youth timeline. I'll use those interchangeably. They mean the same thing. I don't think that means tanking. Oh, one more question. Chompy Doc here again. Do you extend or trade Saddiq Bey? I would trade him. I would not extend him. I'd let his next team figure that out. Saddiq Bey on what, $5.5 million? Let's see. Saddiq Bey on a contract of more. $6.4 million next year is worth far more to most teams around the league than Saddiq Bey on $6.4 million next year, but then $15 to $18 million for a year, 2 to 3 years after that. You'll get far more for him on his current contract than if you would if he had other long-term money associated with him. So if you're blowing up, maybe that's what you do. He is a Troy Weaver guy. So that is something to keep in mind. Like, does Weaver want to give him up? But I would move him while he's on that. I've been saying I would completely do everything. I would completely trade everything. So I would move him. So that is what I would do here. We're not going to get into free agent centers. They don't have money to spend in free agency, so they're not really going to do much in that regard on everything. All right, that's going to do it for this little bonus part of Locked On Pelicans here. Pelicans may be letting the market decide, but maybe leaning towards a rebuild. I don't know what tomorrow is going to look like yet for coverage. I think, we'll obviously have a show. I don't know when I'm going to record that show. I don't know how this is going to go. I'm also doing Locked On NBA tomorrow, so I've got to kind of factor that in. It's going to be a bit of a crazy day, but should be a lot of fun. Should be a little bit unpredictable. There should be a lot going on. So we're going to have the coverage here on Locked On Pelicans. For all you joining, I appreciate y'all so much. Please, please, please just press that subscribe button. It's a great way to support the show. We're never going to charge you money or anything like that. We're always completely free here. Yeah, that's going to do it. All right. See y'all tomorrow with how this is going to go. Thanks again.